Joanna holds master's degrees in gender and development, and she is currently doing her PhD in the Department of Development Studies, School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London. Prior to beginning her PhD, she worked for the Institute for War and Peace Reporting and Oxfam, Great Britain, on gender and development issues. The research seminar series is an initiative of the SRC, and it aims at providing a venue for the AUCA faculty, local and foreign scholars to share their results of their current and previous research projects with other scholars. The series intends to encourage scholarly discourse at the American University of Central Asia. The format of our seminar is usual. We give 20-30 minutes for presentation to Joanna, and after that we'll have a discussion on the topic she will present now.
This is research that I've undertaken for my PhD, and it's very much work in progress, so I don't have any real conclusions to give you at all at the moment, because this is an ongoing research project, and I'm very aware that there are quite big gaps in the data that I do have. So just please bear that in mind when you're listening to the presentation. Okay, so what I intend to cover in this presentation is I'm going to start by talking briefly about what I set out to do and what I've actually ended up doing in regards to my research here in Bishkek, when my research projects developed. I'll briefly talk about my methodology, and then present the findings that I have so far, and then very, very briefly look at what I think are the next steps in terms of my research project, and any input on that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so what did I set out to do? I came to Bishkek at the end of June 2009 with the intention of researching changing attitudes towards citizenship among two generations of Kyrgyz women. Younger women working in the civil society sector and women of their mother's generation. And I had this idea that I would literally interview people's mothers, so I would find research respondents from within younger women working in civil society, and then I would ask them if I could interview their mothers or their aunts or somebody of that generation. So yes, this was going to be achieved through a combination of in-depth life history interviews with individual women, participant observation through volunteering for local NGOs, and then sort of shorter background interviews with representatives from donor organisations. But what I've actually ended up looking at has been far more focused on the experiences and reflections of people working for NGOs, not just women, some men as well, working on women's rights and gender issues. So their thoughts on activism, on changing gender roles, their motivations for working in social organisations, and their thoughts of being part of development and also of civil society. And the main reason for this was when I asked people questions about citizenship, they didn't give very interesting answers. Whereas when I was asking people about activism and their motivations for working for an NGO, they were far more animated and gave far more interesting responses and far more engaged and reflective responses. So that's why the focus of my research has changed. The sort of generational aspect of my research has also shifted to comparing experiences of older and younger women within the sector itself, rather than trying to sort of compare younger women working in civil society with their mothers who might have had a entirely different professional background. Again, to sort of try and bring the focus of my research down a bit to something a bit more manageable. And also because I've really become aware of how much generational issues are a significant factor within the women's NGO sector in Kyrgyzstan. And I've also begun to explore the women's NGO sector in Bishkek more generally, looking at relations between different groups working on gender issues and women's rights, relations between these groups and other actors in civil society, and the role of donors and international organisations in determining their activities. the participant observation aspect of my work when I was going to be working as a volunteer with these local NGOs has kind of not really gone according to plan. So that sort of, I'm still trying to really working out what to do with that data, but it kind of hasn't quite worked according to plan. Yeah, okay. Methodology. Okay, so first of all, yes, participant observation at 2 case study groups. As I said, that's not really gone according to plan. It was going to be my primary means also of identifying research respondents. So the idea was I would go and work as a volunteer for these local NGOs, and through that identify people to interview, but that really hasn't worked at all. And I'm not really going to say any more about the case study work, partly for that reason, but also partly because if you know anything about NGOs in Bishkek, you'd probably be able to identify groups I was talking about, so there are sort of confidentiality issues there as well. So the main methods that I've been using have been in-depth interviews, semi-structured interviews with individuals active as employees or volunteers in NGOs working on women's rights and gender issues. And I've asked people questions on their motivations, why they work on gender and women's rights issues, how they came to the sector, what they think about activism, civil society, and sort of wider processes of social development and social change. And so far, I've only done 10 interviews, even though I've been here for nearly 6 months, because it's been difficult to identify interviews, research respondents. It's been difficult to identify times when people could meet to do a 2-hour interview, and sort of various other factors as well, but mainly it's just been difficult. Within those 10 interviews, I've sort of going through my interview data, there's quite an over-representation of people who work for what I would say are alternative groups or non-mainstream groups, so groups working on working with HIV positive people, for instance, or working on lesbian and gay rights, or working with sex workers, things like that. So who are not really in mainstream of the women's NGO sector here. In addition to that, I've done 2 focus group interviews, which have, and the other thing is they've also, all my research respondents so far have been under 40, so they've all been younger women. I've also done 2 group interviews, which have actually been older women, and then I've also done a series of shorter interviews with gender experts and representatives of donor and international organisations, attended various gender events and seminars, and been trying to keep on top of sort of grey literature and literature produced by donor organisations and NGOs and the research community here in Bishkek as well. Okay, so findings so far. I'm just going to look at 3 themes today, because otherwise we'd be here all day. Perceptions of the women's NGO sector in Bishkek and what it does and how it does it, and relations within